going to tell a few stories here about Stumpy Point. We're going to listen to some. Charles and Uncle Roger are going to tell a few. Naomi wanted to hear the one about Truman, Charles. Tell us about that one first.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you why I came first. I wasn't going to come when Buddy first asked me, but I got a brochure saying they're going to have pie. And I don't see any pie.
Yeah,
Where's the pie, Buddy?
Well, there's Trick, he said.
Well, anyway, the story about Truman was my dog. Truman was a mutt. He didn't have a pedigree, but he had a personality, and he went to school with me. He started school in about the 9th grade, and he went through the 10th and the 11th, and we were consolidated with Engelhard. And he would do the school bus mornings, but he wasn't allowed on, so he didn't graduate. But he sat right alongside of my desk every day. Roger remembers him.
Well,
And he always sit on the left side of my desk. He didn't growl or bark or chase kids. He chased cars and trucks. But he got along, really well. I remember several days the teacher said, Charles, put Truman out. It was rainy days, cold days. We had a coal stove, a heating stove, and Truman didn't smell all that good on cold, wet days. And he'd scratch on the door, and she always said, go do something about Truman. Not much you can do about a dog that's not that smart. You could run him off the porch. I couldn't run him home. And about the second time he'd scratch on the door, Grace would say, go let him in, or she'd go let him in. And he'd come on in and lie down and stink. But he stayed with us. My dog got run over one day. We had a reset every morning. He liked to chase cars and trucks, and he chased an old Rio ice truck, brought ice in here for the fishermen. He didn't realize when he was chasing the front wheel that it had back wheels, and it run over him and smashed his tail. Broke his jawbone, knocked out 3 teeth. And he was the first dog on Stumpy Point that ever went to the vet. Daddy didn't have a car. He hired a man, Roger's uncle, Alton Best, carrying a Washington to the vet. Cost $100. They wired his jawbone, finished pulling 3 teeth, cut off his tail to the very last joint. It was smashed flat. Put 20 stitches in the groin of his leg. The flesh wasn't torn, the skin was torn. You could look right inside his leg. And then as soon as Truman got well, he started chasing cars again. That's the story of my dog. He is named after one of our very best presidents. One that said, buck stops here. He was president when I got the puppy.
We've just endured the worst hurricane I've ever seen in my life a couple of years ago. And it was tough, and we got through it and had a lot of volunteers here in Stumpy Point. Actually, it turned out to be a great time in our history, I think. And Uncle Roger, I was just wondering, what's the worst hurricane you've ever seen? Was Irene the worst?
it wasn't the windiest, but it did more damage to people and flooded more homes. It was a lot more water than we'd ever had in one before. So I've seen it blow harder here and all that. But it was.
Donna was always the one I heard Mom talk about.
It was bad, but it didn't shut as many people down as Irene did. Because it flooded about 40 homes, didn't it?
I don't know, I just got back in mine last night.
Yeah, it's all just back in his house last night. I got flooded yesterday again, a little short flood under the house. So I think that might be part of it. I got a picture I want somebody to pass around. I would like for you all to look at it. I want you to, me and Charles is both in this class, because
Roger looks the best.
we were people of great wealth when we were young and in school. Should have come here and showed this picture, folks. I want to see what
Roger's always out
how
front.
things were when we were little. You can tell by that picture. I'll show it to you.
You can tell Roger.
Well, I'm getting to the age where I need to put my glasses on.
You know, 3 or 4 of those students had shoes.
I was one of the ones that didn't.
Roger's not one of them.
Roger's still not wearing socks.
Well, I've got halfway there. So.
There you go.
Myra, you ought to be up here.
Yeah, she needs to get up. We need to get Miss Myra up here. Get her up here.
You know, Myra was one of the girls that I remember most when I was growing up. That's because she was the prettiest girl in our community. But she was 4 years older than me. And when I was 14, she was about ready to be married. And she married a really great guy. But I didn't have a shot. I was just too young, too little. But I remember how pretty she was. And she looks almost as good now as she did then.
Well, why you need to pay him?
I might have a shot now.
Well, you talking about some good men. Talking about Mr. Jim, Miss Myra's husband. Uncle Roger fished with him a long time, and did you, Charles? Did you ever fish with Jim?
I fished with him one time.
One time?
Yeah, well, that was enough. So we troll boated a little bit when they owned the Mohawk. You remember the Mohawk?
No, I'm too young.
Yeah.
I troll boated a little bit with Jim. We shrimped a little bit. We goose hunted mostly, but we shrimped some.
You know, there was, go ahead. No, I was just going to tell you about, there was an old man lived here a while back. His name was Sam Mitchett. He's my wife's grandfather's brother. And he was, he just did a little bit of farming. He was never married, and he'd never been away from Stumpy Point. Because back then the road only opened in here in 1928. So Mr. George, another one of her grandmother's brothers, decided to take him to town. He'd never been anywhere. And they took him to Elizabeth City. So when they got him to Elizabeth City, they took him to get his hair cut. He probably never had his hair cut by a barber in his life. And they said the barber asked him, you know, how did he want it cut? So Mr. Sam told him he didn't want it any longer than it was. Then, you know, they done a lot of farming here and everything, and he'd never had a hot dog in his life. So they ordered a hot dog there in Elizabeth City. So they went around and asked everybody, what do you want on your hot dog, mustard, and all this stuff. So they asked Mr. Sam what he wanted on his. He said he believed he'd have strawberries. It was a little different.
You know, I remember Sam too. He was one of the 2 men on Stumpy Point that my dog didn't like. Every time he come by my house, I'd have to hold my dog. He really didn't like Mr. Sam. And another thing I remember about, he was a little bit touchy. I know my cousin and I were crabbing one day, soft crabbing, by hand along the shoreline. And Sam had a skiff down to his landing tied to a little stake close to the shore. And my cousin was sitting on the side of that skiff. Skiffs around here were sacred in those days. Uncle Monroe had one, right till it landed. I've never touched it in my life. I just wouldn't put my hands on it, crab around it, look in it, but I've never touched it. He had a railway, pulled it up on the railway, he made it on the railway. I've never even touched the railway. Skiffs were just something you didn't handle. Boyd decided he would sit down on Sam's skiff. Sam come down the landing and he said, "Boy, get off my skiff." I don't remember what Boyd said. He must have been about 12 or 13. But I remember what Sam did. He rolled up his pants, got him a little stick about 2 feet long, walked out beside that skiff and grabbed Boyd by his wrist on his left arm and held it up and wore him out. And when he turned Boyd loose, as far as I know, he never got back on that skiff. I never got on it. I wouldn't have got on it the first time. I'm not sure he had all he needed. He wrapped a little tight. Wanda's uncle. Everybody had a garden in those days, and Sam's was about a mile or half a mile right straight back in the woods. That's where he went to raise his vegetables. I've been to it, but I never touched it or walked across it. He even had cranberries around it and blueberry bushes, but I never picked a berry.
You know, my granddaddy said back when he was a boy, he told me this, he said that wages weren't real high on Stumpy Point, and he said that, and used to everything, you know, when there's no road, but the people, everything was kind of brought ashore from the landings, they call them out here. And, you know, as close as they could get, and boats were tied up out there, so this man was going to build his house, and so they brought the lumber in on a barge or a boat, wherever what they had it on. But he said the man contracted him, he was going to carry it ashore for 15 cents, the lumber to build the house. He said, but long in the middle or the last of it, he got so skinned up and broke down on his back that he couldn't finish, and the guy only paid him a nickel.
You know, wages got better than that because the man that started East Carolina Bank was Mr. Tony Spencer. I called him Uncle Tony, but he wasn't any kin to me. He said he started working when he was 16 at Stumpy Point fishing poundets. Fished in the winter time, and he made 50 cents a day. And if he worked on Saturdays, he made $3. He said most of the time he got off Saturdays. And anyway, he made $2.50 a week. So he worked over here from January to April. That was the year in shed fishing. And he saved all the money he made because he lived with the people he was working with. In those days, you just moved in with the family that hired you. And they fed you and gave you a place to sleep. And your pay was tax-free and just free. You made it all. And he saved all his money and moved back to Englehart and bought a case of soft drinks and a case of nabs. They come 4 in a package, sat one on top of the other, and they sold for a nickel. And then after he sold his nabs and drinks, he bought another case of drinks, another case of nabs. And he wound up with a general merchandise store. And he sold everything. He sold nets, oilskins, paint, hardware, groceries, clothes, hats, anything you could think of, Tony sold it. And when I started housekeeping, my wife and I went down to Uncle Tony's and said, well, we'd like some furniture, but we don't have any money. And we don't have any credit. And I'm fishing pound nets, and I'm not making any money. But we're doing the best we can. And he said, well, I'll make a phone call. So he come in and he called Aunt Lou. That was Lou Hooper, Beeman Hooper's wife. Now, I don't know what she told him, But he come back over to his furniture store, and during this time he has opened a furniture store too. Plus he bought a lot of land in Hyde County, and the Harlan's apartment. And he said, go ahead and get whatever you want. We got $1,200 worth of furniture. That put us in housekeeping. That was all we wanted. And it was no money down, and no interest, and no payments. And pay me when you can.
Wow.
And we must have paid him in 4 or 5 years. But we did pay him the $1,200. When he died, we didn't owe him anything. But I don't think you can get your furniture like that today. He put a lot of people in housekeeping. And he's the man that started East Carolina Bank. I made my first loan there. It was in 1951. I borrowed $100. They had 2 rooms, 2 people. They had a teller, cashier, loan officer. That was all Aunt Sally, one woman. And Mr. Matthews okayed it. My granddaddy signed the note, a 90-day promissory note, $100. I renewed it 3 or 4 times before I got it paid. Now they charge you $100 to make a loan.
Charles, what did y'all do around here as young boys? What did you do for entertainment?
Well, my granddaddy and Roger's granddaddy had 20 children.
Only Charles.
My granddaddy lived in a house that Isabel finished. The one that Brewster lived in, that was my granddaddy on the Hooper side, mother's side. They had 11 children. And 2 of them died when they were children, and 9 grew up. And Mr. Albert and Miss Luther had 9, and 2 of those died when they were children, and the 7 grew up. And they were all the same age. I don't mean they're all born that day, but they all grew up together. The next to the youngest in both families was my mother and Aunt Bert and Dick, Myra's daddy, and they were the same age. They were 2 younger than those 3. Brother and Aunt Bert were twins, and they were growing up along with Dick. And then there was a couple more and a couple more and a couple more on up the ladder, and they were all growing up together in that same neighborhood with nothing in between them, just a vacant lot between 2 houses. It probably was not a quiet neighborhood. I'd give them 16 children growing up back together.
When Isabel hit, Graham, Wilma, was in the church down here in the fellowship hall, and we were holding up in there because it was high in case the tide come up. And I went for a ride, and that house had fallen down. Well, I knew it as Aunt Irene's house. So I came back and I said, Aunt Irene's house just fell down, and Graham said, that's not Aunt Irene's house, that's Grandpa Irvin's house.
Yeah, Grandpa Irvin built it.
Which that was my great-grandfather. And she told me the story about how she would go down there as a little girl, and she would stay in the room with Grandpa Irvin. What was his wife's name?
Francis.
And Graham would be in a little, I don't know if it was a single bed or a little bed, and she would wake up in the morning and she would pretend like she was asleep, and she'd look over at Grandpa Irvin, and he would start his day. She said he was wearing a set of red union suit. That's what he wore to bed. And she said he would start his day rolling out and getting down on his knees and starting it in prayer. And she can remember that. And so that's how I found out that was the Grandpa Irvin's house instead of the Aunt Irene house.
Well, Grandpa Irving died when I was 2. He died on Christmas Eve. I would have been 3 in March. And his wife come to live with us, my grandmother, when I was about 8 years old. And we moved to Berkeley in World War II, and she moved with us. And when we come back after World War II was over, she come back with us. And she stayed with us till I was about 14, and spent the weekend with Aunt Gert and had a heart attack. Her other daughter, and stayed there the rest of her life. But every night before she'd go to bed, she'd read her Bible. She only went to the 3rd grade, and she had a crooked finger like that. She called it a bone fella. I call it a crook in her finger. And she'd read it down her Bible. I don't know how could she read it. She read the King James Version with a 3rd grade education, but she read it every night. And when she went to bed, she got down on her knees for about 30 minutes. And the next morning when she woke up, she'd get back on her knees for 30 minutes. And then she'd go out in the living room and read her Bible. And after that, then she'd dress and begin her day. But that's how she finished and started every day. I don't suppose all people did that, but she did. I don't know what he did. I was only 2 when he died. I knew he had a car. The road was dirt. And there wasn't a road to Man's Harbor. And the road in Englehart must not have been much, because it was dirt here till after I was moved to Berkeley when I was 8 years old. I have a picture of his car. It was a Whippet. I've never seen a Whippet, except in that picture. It looked like a fancy car. It was a big car. I don't know I had much time to drive.
Talking about that dirt road, Daddy Bob told me one time he had a date in Englehart, and he pedaled his bicycle down that dirt road 25 miles to Englehart. I bet he was in good shape when he got down there for his date.
Well, you know, our roads have not always been good. Even later on in life, I don't know, when I was a senior in high school, I didn't have a car. Roger didn't have a car. But Roger was going to take me down to see my girlfriend in Gull Rock. And the daddy, I said, Roger, she's got a cousin living right down the road from her. You'd like her. And he thought he'd probably like her too. He hadn't gone with Wanda then, I don't think. He might have. The daddy said, don't you take that truck away from Stumpy Point. It was a green Chevrolet truck. And between Lake Landing and Gull Rock, it was all dirt. And it was winter, and they were bad. And the little place before you get to Gull Rock is called Last Chance. That's as far as we got, was Last Chance. We got stuck. A couple of black boys helped get us out. The black boys and me were full of mud. We got back to Englehart. Roger said, then they told me not to go away from Stumpy Point, this truck full of mud. We stopped to the ice plant. The man that worked the ice plant, his name was Ham Bone. He run the ice plant, as far as I know, until the ice plant closed. Ham Bone got a water hose right there, and we washed that truck down. I don't think a guy ever knows that we went as far as we went. We didn't get to Gull Rock. That was our destination, but we only got to, we didn't get to the last step, did we?
You didn't see any girl either.
Well, it probably wouldn't have been worth it anyway. You might not like it.
You know, there's a book. This came out of a book, what I'm going to tell you. This is not something. And a boat came in here in 1912. And a lot of people have read it. What was the name of that book?
The Boy, Me, and the Cat.
The Boy, Me, and the Cat was the name of it. And it was this man and his son, and they were going kind of like down the East Coast, stopping these little places. So this was in 1912 when he came here. And the day he came here, Robbie's mama's daddy was born that night with the man there. But he said that, and he met my grandfather, Albert Best. So they invited him into the house and everything. And he said in that morning, he said, or that night when he came there, he said the old woman just had another baby there. And he said he described in Stumpy Point, he said he'd never seen such poverty in all of his lifetime. He said the people lived in shacks and they didn't do anything. They just went to church, and lived. And he said they stayed here 2 or 3 days, but he said the people, he was just a little bit afraid of them. Said he was always afraid he was going to say something to offend somebody before he left, but he just described Stumpy Point as the poorest place that he'd ever seen in his life. So maybe we've come up a little ways since then.
Well, that man wasn't totally dumb.
No,
Because I think he was smart not to offend Mr. Albert.
Yeah, well, I think he probably was.
I knew Mr. Albert.
Yeah, while I'm thinking about it, Charles Hammer run over me one time with a truck.
I didn't run over Roger, he jumped under the wheel.
He jumped on it.
Yeah, Roger told me about 2 weeks ago, he said, I never thought I'd live to be this old. I said, no, I didn't either. And I was thinking about it today. When Roger was 20, I didn't think he'd live to be 25. He wrecked 3 or 4 cars, sunk a boat or 2. He almost killed me a couple of times. Like got me shot one night. And all told, I don't know how he ever got to be 25, really. 78. I know. Remember one year that when a barge run in that bridge, going to Man's Harbor? And the bridge was one way. And I was coming over the bridge with Roger. He had about a 56 or 7 Chevrolet. And he was going downhill. And it was about 3 in the morning. And the speedometer was hid. And we were on the wrong side because the wrong side was the one way. And Roger looked over at me and he said, "Are you scared?" I said, "Am I scared of what?" But it's a wonder he did get to be 25. He was only probably 20 then, or 21 or something. He wasn't married. He was probably in the Marine Corps.
You talking about all the wrecks he was in? He's told me a few about the wrecks on the Englehard Road. Uncle Roger, tell us about the time that your uncle got you out of that, running in that bridge or whatever with the judge down there. You were telling me, I guess I don't know, you boys got in a wreck and you left the scene, and Uncle out and he liked to beat the judge or something. Tell us about that, when the state trooper come down there and got up with you.
Oh, I just run in the canal. That wasn't in it.
You were saying that the judge knew Uncle Alton, didn't he? And he kind of had a word with him.
Oh, yeah.
You can talk, Roger. Statute of limitations.
He's scared, isn't he?
They won't get you.
I know one thing happened to me down there. I went the first driving test that I ever tried to get my license when I was old enough was I was 16 years old, and there was the old man. He was kind of a grumpy looking fellow, and he didn't have a lot of patience for kids and everything. But anyhow, he told me to turn around, and I backed in the canal. When he got through to me, I was always scared. I never went back to Swan Court to try to get no license. I finally got on the Manio.
Swan Quarter was not a good place to get your license. That's where I went to get my license. I was 17. I'd been driving for a while, but we didn't have any law here. I didn't have a need for a license, and I had to go all the way to Swan Court to get them. And when I was a senior, the teacher wanted me to drive the school bus. She didn't want to drive it anymore. Well, they didn't have a license. And I went to Swan Court to get my license, and they showed me these 4 signs, and I said, what are these signs? And they showed me this sign sticking up on its end, like this, and they wanted me to say it's a diamond. You know, I couldn't think of diamond, and I said it's square. We went on and he come back to that sign and he said, what is this sign? I said, it's still square. He said, well, come back when you know your signs. Well, you know that sign is square. It's still square. It's square today. School signs are like that. They're standing on its point, but it's still square. You can lay it down flat or roll it over, lay it around. But you know something with 4 right angles and equal lines, it's square. But that man wasn't giving me my license because he didn't know it was square. And that's probably what happened to Roger when he was back in the canal. The man probably had him back in the canal. He probably intimidated Roger. He was easy to intimidate when he was young.
Did you ever get your license down there?
No. Let the man up, got him.
We ran a fish house, and we had a boy that worked for us, Curtis Lucas, who lives in Englehart, and he went down there and to get his license, and they sent him away from there with a learner's permit. But the man scared him so bad that he never went back to get his license, and we saw him about a month ago, and he still hadn't, and that's been 20 years. I even offered to buy him a car. He was real good help. We helped him get an old car or something. I said, if you'll go get a driver's license, I'll get you a car. He said, nothing happened. He was not going to take the test. So he kind of got a little frightened.
When Roger and I were growing up, you didn't really need a license. We didn't have any law. Your parents didn't seem to mind. And no one minded. I probably wouldn't have gotten my license when I did, except they wanted me to drive the bus. And I really made some big money. I got $1 a day. I had $20 a month driving that bunch full of screaming youngers from here to Englehart and back. Had a nice group though, the same group in that picture.
Charles, how fast did the bus go?
31.
31?
Yeah, walk with it.
Yeah.
So you had to drive it to Englehart twice a day to pick
No,
them up? Yeah.
no, I lived here. This are the kids that went, Stumpy Point children.
Okay.
I drove them to Englehart and then drove them back at 31 miles. And it wouldn't go 31 if you pushed it to the floor about 27 or 8. You had to jiggle it, get it just right. 31 miles. I could go faster on a northeaster, but coming back you'd lose it all.
What happened when you took a day off?
I never had a day off. I was the only driver. Well, Grace could drive, but she didn't like to drive. You know, she'd been those young ones all of her life. And
Is that because you were on the bus or Uncle
partly.
Roger?
Grace drove it in the beginning, but she didn't like it. She didn't like all those screaming kids. And
How did Miss Grace get here?
she got here on a boat. It's the way we all got here.
Took her 3 days to get here from her home. She lived up in Upper State. She told me that.
She lived in Boone.
Took her 3 days to get to Stumpy Point. That was the boat and the bus and the whole, you know.
I bet she was happy when she got here.
She said they told her and Manny to just follow the beams and she'd get to Stumpy Point.
Took her 70 years to get away from here. She lived here till she was 99. She come in out of college, and college must have been shorter then because she was only about 20. And man, she was lucky though. She married one of them hooker boys. Stayed here the rest of her life.
When did y'all start going to Englehart school?
when I was a senior in 1950. We went to Englehart because our state wanted to consolidate schools, and the road, Man's Harbor, was dirt, and they didn't have a ferry. As soon as they paved the road and built the bridge, no, as soon as they paved the road,
You read the word ferry.
the road was ferry. But they went to Englehart, and I just went one year. That's how I know what year it was. I graduated in 51, so I went, started on there in 1950.
Was it just the high school class that went to Englehart, but they still have the elementary here, right?
The first 8 grades went,
Okay.
and there were so few of us that they went in a van. It had seats parallel with the side of the van, and you sit facing each other. There wasn't very many children in school then. There's a lot here in the beginning. When I started school, there were 8 in my first grade, and about 75 in school.
How many people were on Stumpy Point then?
I don't know, but there was a lot more than there is
lot.
now.
300, 400?
There might not be any more houses, but there were more people per house. There must have been 75, because there were 3 boys and 5 girls in my class. I was in level 1 of them, first time I'd ever seen her.
Well, there was 4 stores, full-time stores.
Yeah. There had been more,
Yeah.
but there was 4 then.
You guys don't remember Ethan Wharf working or anything, do you?
No, I remember the wharf. There was a fish house on the end of it, but when we come along, it was just an empty building. The dock was still there. You could drive out on the dock.
Was there some stores right here besides Jasper's? I mean,
Oh,
Mr.
yeah.
Beeman's? When you were,
Well, it was Mr. Lennon's, the Hooker Brothers.
Okay.
They were the oil distributors. That's the store Jasper.
When Jasper took over that store, he bought it from Camargo and Uncle Lennon. That was my granddaddy's brothers. There was 4 of those boys, and they all had stores. My grandpa had one, Grandpa Irvin. He was our first postmaster. And his 2 brothers had that store that Jasper bought, the one you remember. And his other brother, Uncle Joan, he had a big family here. His wife died, and he moved to Elizabeth City and opened another store. And that's Mickey's office equipment. It's still in business. Mickey's dead, Mickey Jr. runs it. But all those boys had stores. When Jasper bought it, he was one of the oldest Texaco distributors in our state. And that meant that he bought his gas and oil cheaper than most of the distributors in our state. I don't know how old it was, but it started with Uncle Marvin and Uncle Lennon, and it brought it in here in boats. If you,
across Ethan's Wharf back then? No, how did they get here?
right up to the fish house, used to be Rogers, Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
They had either 3 or 4 barrels. How many milk was it? 4? They were up high, and they were big barrels.
Mr. Robbie back there on the wall.
Yeah. And they brought them in here in boats and pumped it in those barrels. And we didn't have electricity. They didn't have pumps in the barrel. The truck run right in front of the barrels and just put a hose in the truck, pulled a little handle, and got what fuel we wanted and shut it off. And that truck distributed fuel through the community.
Charles, what was the best day you and Roger had oystering in the bay here?
In the
Back when
bay?
there were a lot of oysters, yeah.
I don't know. Not really. I never oystered in this bay very much, yeah.
I worked my first day there, out on a boat. It was a little, a 23-foot boat, and that was my first day of being a captain on a boat. And my mate was a man who used to live here in Wolf's Life. His name was Merle Pfeiffer. And I was only 11 years old. But we went, of course, out to Rail Bay or something, and he was about as strong as 3 men. Of course, I was about just a boy. And we catch a boatload, and his granddaddy had an oyster place down the road on that curve. Anybody told you that?
Granddad Woody.
Right in front of almost Lucy's house. And we come in, but there was lots of oysters over there. Charles used to over there.
Yeah, I remember one day when I was in about the 7th grade, I could look out the window and see them oystering. And this boat was oystering by hand, and it was Dick Nowden. That was Mara's daddy and his brother. And they caught 50 bushels by hand in a round bottom shag boat, and come in and unload them and went back and caught 50 more. And they were right in front of the schoolhouse, working by hand. So they caught 100 in a round bottom shag boat, probably didn't have a table, just probably pulled it up on the washboard, dumped them in the boat. They were both kind of big, husky men. Mara's daddy was a big man, and his brother was tall, stringy. Dick was heavier, but Alton was big. And they caught 100 bushels that day.
They were real thick, Jack.
Well, we were in
Real
the
thick.
Yeah.
They had to be thick. I've caught 100, but I was catching it with a power where you just push a little lever and it comes up on the washboard. We caught 104 one day in a crab slough in the afternoon. Started a little after 12. Might not have been that classic.
I noticed that about your
Did you
oysters.
get,
We sold them all.
did you get a money for them back then?
I don't remember.
I remember when they were $1 a tub, they called them oysters. And a tub's not a bushel, it's like 5 packs or something like
Yeah,
that.
it is 5 pounds.
Yeah.
Then I started keeping records in 1960, and I think I quit about 1961. But that January, they were $1.25 a tub. That's $1 a bushel. And I was working a 25-foot boat alone in the crab hole. And I was getting $1.25 for a tub, and the man would always complain because the tub wasn't full enough. They had been about $3.50 in October, November, and December, but they always went down after Christmas. They've not always been worth $40 or $50 like they are now. I don't think I've ever sold any cheaper than that. That's been a while ago. But I was married.
Now, at one time you oystered and then you peddled them on certain days, right?
Yeah. I did. I was telling Dad today about that, peddling oysters down the Outer Banks. It was kind of difficult. Our competition were 2 young women, Myra and Wanda. They were usually $1 cheaper than we were.
Had big oysters too.
And it was Mikey and me down there trying to sell oysters behind Wanda and Myra. When they were a lot younger and they weren't any prettier than they are now, but they looked pretty good. It was a lot better than Mike. Instead, we were getting $7. They were getting $6.
Yeah, so.
They were always $1 cheaper, 100% prettier, and a little bit earlier.
There was no market for oysters for a few years here, unless you could peddle them. You had to catch them and then stop and go on the road and sell them. Charles was better at it than anybody else.
Yeah, I remember a day, Charles, a woman came by to get a pack of oysters. And they were 50 cents a pack. the way the story went. He didn't have anything but $1. Charles had no change, so he ripped the $1 in half and gave her half of it back.
Yeah, I sold a peck of oyster to a man one day, to Buxton. And he was a deputy. But he didn't have on his uniform, and he bought one peck. And Mike was shoveling them up, and he shoved them up in a peck bucket. And it wasn't quite full. But Mike was stuck the shovel there, he was going to shovel it up and fill it full. And the man shook the bucket. It made me mad. And I had on a pair of leather boots, and I stomped those oysters down in that bucket and broke part of them. Then Mike filled it up. I dumped it in a little beer carton, got our $2. And we come back next week, that same man met us and had in his uniform and got another peck of oysters. And Mike shoveled them up, the bucket's almost full, and he said, "It'll be all right if you don't stomp them this time."
Charles, you were telling me about that, selling some oysters one time, and that you caught them in crab slough. Tell me, and that you stopped in Curry Tuck?
Yeah, that one chooser.
Yeah.
He knew it all. Mike and I stopped at a place in Curry Tuck on the way home. The man there shooting pool. That place is closed up now. And Mike asked the man if he didn't want a bushel of oysters. He said he'd like to have a bushel of oysters, but he didn't want it to come out the crab slough. Well, these are crab slough oysters. And Mike said, well, these are crab slough oysters. And this wine shooter said, I can tell crab slough oysters. I said, well, come look at them. He came out to the back of the truck, looked in our truck, he said, they're not crab slough. Mike said, where do you think they come from? I don't know. They didn't come out the crab slough. Mike said, well, open you one. We opened one, the man ate it, smacked the lip. He said, they're not as good as crab slough oysters. He didn't buy one either. Just a one shooter. Mike was a card, you know. He might have had a fight one day over half a bushel of oysters. We stopped the poor boys up there in Camden, and the man said, I don't want any oysters, but I know a man that will buy some. We would get $7 a bushel, $4 a half a bushel, $2 a peck. Man come out there and he said, yeah, he wanted some oysters, he'd take half a bushel. I shoved him up half a bushel. Mike poured them in a box. And I started telling Mike. Mike said they're $4. He said they're $3.50. Mike said, the oysters, if you want them, they're $4. He said, you're getting $7 a bushel. If I pay you $4, you're cheating me out of 50 cents. Mike said, no, we're not. We're getting $4 for a half a bushel. If you'll buy a bushel, you'll save $1. You can get them for $7. And you know, they went round and around. I don't remember where the man got the oysters or not. But if he did get them, he paid Mike $4. I know that. I'm not sure who was right. But you know, we were not gouging the man. We charged everybody $4 a half, $7 a bushel. We're trying to save people money. We're always trying to save people money.
You opened up some of them boatloads of fish you used to get.
That was Roger. I just fished. You know, Fred, I never did learn to fish. I fished for 50 years, but I never got very good at it. I just did it. I had a partner in you more back than I did. I had a man that I worked with, Sheila's daddy, that didn't know anything but work.
That's the truth.
You know, we fished one Friday, and we caught a lot of fish. I don't know how many fish we caught. We caught a lot of fish. And some of the other boys caught a lot of fish too. And we sold them all to Lance Harris. And we never got our net cleaned out that night. fished it with gill net until about 1 o'clock in the morning. That would be Saturday morning. And Lance come over and he said, now Golden, we don't have any market tomorrow. It's Saturday. He said, I don't have any ice. I've used all the ice I got, and I can't buy any fish until Monday. Golden never answered him. You know, I was delighted. We had a big sale. I was tired, sleepy, it was late. Crew was worn out, worked all week, and it was Saturday morning, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. We got everything cleaned out, net cleaned out, boats cleaned up. Hildred said, a bit of fish in the morning, hadn't we? Weren't you with us then, buddy?
No, I won't be you.
Anyway, whoever the other man was said, well, we don't have any market. And Golden said, they'll have a market by the time we get in with the fish. So we got up the next morning, it was real pretty and calm. Went across the sign, set out, set our net, made our pull, set the stake net, pulled her together, and we had 8 or 10 fish. And I was glad we didn't have any fish. And we took her up and come on up. That's the kind of man I work with. Man didn't have no ice, no market, didn't want any fish. We fished anyway.
Fred, when you're a fisherman, you always think you're great if you've had a real big catch like that. You think, well, I'm pretty good. But if you go about 2 weeks and don't catch none, you start thinking, you know, I'm not so hot at this. So I think you're always confronted with that. It's your present situation, you know.
We fished 9 consecutive days during long netting and never made a sale. That might be some kind of a record. We either picked a place where there wasn't any fish, the tide runs so strong we got whipped out, we made some mistakes, things happened. The only fish we caught was a few that was gilled in the net. Were you with us then, buddy?
I was reading in.
And we never ever sold any fish that we got gilled. Buddy always took in the land for Pepsi-Cola money. Golden had a 43 or 4 foot boat, whole stern over on the deck was full of Pepsi-Colas. If we get a couple of bushels of fish, turn it into Pepsis. But we fished 9 straight days. Never made a sale. That was probably a week and a half.
You didn't think you're so good then,
No, I
did
didn't
you?
think it was so good then. But we didn't always catch fish. We just sometimes caught fish. You know, we caught enough fish, not us, not me or Roger, but the point, Stumpy Point, they caught enough fish one year that come out this article in USA Today. It started something like this. The most money per capita earned per zip code in the United States was North Hollywood, West Palm Beach, Boston, and Stumpy Point. So Stumpy Point? Yeah, Stumpy Point. Their average per capita income for this zip code that particular year, it was a long time ago, was $58,000. Now that included the people that were on welfare, the people that were retired, the people that didn't work at all, and just as a whole rule, the whole community, $58,000. We were number 38 in the country. I got the article home.
I remember that because we were down in Miss Belle Gray's yard playing football that Sunday when that article came out. Lamar and me and Beeman, Hines and a few people. And all these cars kept riding up and down Stumpy Point to see what all the fuss was about. We were thinking maybe they'd come to watch us play football. But it was the most traffic I think I'd ever seen on Stumpy Point.
I think that might have been the same year we made a 9 consecutive sets.
Well, didn't y'all use pound nets a lot? back then?
Until we about starved to death, we did. I was the last man to fish pound nets on Stumpy Point, and I was 38 years old, and that was 42 years ago. The year before that, there were three crews. Dick and Allen fished, and Milton Troy fished, and I fished. But that particular year, those two had quit, and everybody else previously had quit. And I hung in until I was 38, and we had 2 storms. We didn't catch any fish in September. We started catching a few nice big gray trout. Had a storm. Well, we were 3 weeks taking our nets up, sticking the stakes that were broke, straightening out the ones that were pulled down, putting them back. Fished about 2 weeks, started catching some fish, had another storm. I quit. I lost one net, got the other 3 up. Man called along and said he'd give me $800 for them. I said, I'll take it. He come to get them. He said, I've only got 6. I said, you can send me the 2. He's never sent me the 2. I don't remember his name. He was from Edenton. I'm glad he got them. $600 wouldn't buy the chain on the lead. Probably wouldn't buy the rope they were hung on. Anyway, I don't have any pound nets.
They used to pile the highway full of nets here from right where Buddy lives. And people, they came in down there because they'd pull them out of skiffs on the road because they had this old moss and growing on them, and they were just a slop. And the roads were just full of them, and they put them on the road where people would run over them with their cars. But you know, you just couldn't hardly get through the mess. But if you get hung up in one of them or run over one of their bricks or something, they were right ready to shoot you for tying up their nets. But everything was covered with them. But it smelled like a ditch, and it was a mess.
You know, I was driving my daddy's truck one night. It was a 46 International.
That's the one you run over me with.
That truck cost $1,006. New, 3/4 ton, 1946. Trucks were hard to get. You had to have a priority to buy one. And Daddy had a priority because he wanted to buy fish. And he made a deal with International, Chevrolet, Ford, and GMC, and took the first one he could get, which was an International. And they had pound nets spread on the road, belonging to Uncle Calvin, that was Wanda's granddaddy, right in front of where Dal Gray lives. And they had a store there, Dallas' store. And I was coming up the road with Billy Hooper, Wanda's uncle, and on the corner of the fountain they had double bricks. And I thought I'd run over one of those bricks. And Billy said, "You just run over Roger." I said, "I think we run over a brick." He said, "You better stop." I stopped and we went back down. He was laying on the road on top of that pound cake chicken. Well, Roger was young, and you know, he was kind of wiry. We got him in the truck and carried him down to Miss Lucy and put him out. He seemed like he was all right. He walked to the house, and he come to school the next morning. It must have been about the 8th or 9th grade. He was limping a little bit, but he seemed like he was all right. I didn't have a driver's license then. But it was just one of those things.
Yeah, Roger thought it was one of them things too.
It was a time when, you know, you're just in the wrong place.
Where did he come from?
I don't know where he came from. I know where he went. We carried him home. Yeah.
What was your version of that, Roger?
Well, it weren't his fault really. Back in the days, that truck he's talking about, they just had a running board right where the door opened and back. The running board didn't go back to the back fender back in them days. And I was going to jump in the truck. Just jump in the side of the truck or go and buy it. So when I went to jump the running board, wasn't none there, so I went over and Charles run over.
I didn't run over all of him. It didn't hit his head.
They took me down.
It wouldn't have mattered.
His daddy and mine decided, they said, Charles said, they said, I think you'll be all right.
You know, Guy was kind of tough, Roger's daddy. He didn't think it would hurt his boy. And Guy weren't near as tough as his daddy, Mr. Albert. The star was a champion checker player. Actually, I smoked a pipe, played checker, meaner than a snake.
Always.
I heard people say, you know, they used to shoot their hogs with a .22 rifle. Then Mr. Albert used to knock them in the head with an axe, saving a bullet again.
Roger, did you own that boat called the Breed? The boat called the Breed?
That was Mikey's boat.
Greeley,
Mikey's boat.
you owe me.
No.
Tell him.
No, I didn't. Did Mikey own it?
Yeah, Mikey had it.
Mikey
Mike
owned it?
Kane owned it.
Yeah.
No.
That was an old boat that Jimmy threw away, and Mikey repaired it. I thought Mikey was gonna sell it, and he worked on it. He worked it 2 or 3 years, and Stevie worked it a year or two. That's been tough, because run in a one-shooter and sunk him.
I think it's over in the ditch now. It sunk years ago.
I don't know where the Greeley is. I'll be up one of these ditches.
Tell us a couple hunting tales.
All right. You know, when I was in the 8th grade, we used to shoot robins around here. We always had robins for our lunch on Sunday. And in my house, we'd have them another time or two during the week, because everybody in the community liked robins. I used to sell them for a nickel a piece, or 50 cents a dozen. And I had a regular customer. And when I was in about the 8th grade, I carried my .22 rifle to school with me. I guess they put you in jail now. All the kids will go nuts. They call up all the sheriffs and police. But I carried my .22 to school with me in a pocket full of bullets. And we had a light snow. And the ground was kind of damp. That makes the earthworm that comes out. I never knew what earthworm was until I was 40 or 50. We always called them robin worm. Because when the ground's wet, the earthworms come up, robins come out to eat them. Looked like a good day. Light snow, it was melting, and the worms were out. I carried my rifle to school, and I had on a pair of hip boots, and I was walking through people's yards shooting robins on the way home. And when I got to where Michelle lives, right across the ditch was a big pine tree. Well, I saw this car go by me that I wasn't familiar with. And I thought, I bet that's a game warden. Well, it was a game warden. It was Willie Gray Cahoon, a federal man from Englehart. Well, Willie went back up the road, back where Mr. Sam lived, parked his car. I propped my gun there on a post in Michelle's house, shot a robin in that pine limb. It was about a 4 by 16 foot plank across that ditch. I walked across that plank, and I heard the car start up and come down the road. By the time I picked up the robin, I had probably a dozen. When you carry a robin, I'd stick her head between my fingers like that. And I had a handful of robins, and I just hold them in my hand as I was walking through the community. This car stopped right in front of the house next to Michelle, just to the west of Michelle, when I used to live in. Willie Gray opened that door and said, "Hey, boy." I said, "Hey." And I took off. I run across the Mars yard, and there's a little ditch there. I jumped in that ditch. I run back to that house where Luke shoved down and built that little shack he lives in. And then I run back to where Wanda lived, Bob's place. And they had a path about 8 or 10 feet wide. And I run down that path. Right at the end of the path had an outhouse. And that canal then was just a ditch, about 8 or 10 feet wide. I jumped that ditch, lost my birds, dropped them in the ditch. I just made it across, landed on my knees with my toes in the water. Then I got up and started running through that woods. You couldn't run right straight back where Wanda lived. There's ponds there. So I went around to the left till I got to where I live. I run about a quarter of a mile or more right straight back in the woods till I was exhausted. Got down behind a pine tree where I couldn't see toward the road and the pine was hiding me. I sit there till I caught my breath. It took me a while before I had the nerve to look around to see if the game warden was behind me. Well, there wasn't any game warden. I was afraid to go back where I had come. Afraid he was somewhere between his car and where I jumped the ditch. So I went back to Robbie's, back to John, to the next house. It was Oscar Payne. I knew he had a plank across the ditch. I didn't want to jump it again. I didn't think I could make it. I didn't think I could make it the first time, but I barely did. I come across Oscar ditch. Then I come across where John lives now, where Uncle Benro was. He had a plank. I come across that plank where Robbie lived, come up through Uncle Beeman's chicken yard and pig pen. He had a fence on that. And then there's a bridge between Uncle Beeman's and where I live now, to the back door, and come across that and come in the house. Then it was dark. And Mother said, "Son, where have you been?" Well, I shot a few robins. Where are they? Well, I lost them. There was a man after me. I think it might have been a game warden. And I had on a blue and gold shirt. It's a plaid shirt, and the gold part was about like that in his sweater. It was bright, and the blue was bright. After supper that night, I thought, I bet Willie Gray's still here. So I took my shirt off, put on a green corduroy shirt. And when I come down the road, which was my custom. Do you remember where Lit Meekins had the store? Is that where that house is now? Whose house is it?
King and Joe.
King and Joe's.
Coffee shop.
Coffee shop. That was a general store then. Lit Meekins owned it. Willie Gray was still parked there, sitting in his car. But since I had changed shirts, he didn't recognize me because he hadn't been that close to me. He only saw the back of me going the way. And he was still sitting there in that car. But it's a robin yarn.
That's the Ohio State bird. Yeah.
It's a couple of state birds. It's a delicious bird. You know, I haven't shot a robin since 1975. I was born again in 1975, and I thought, maybe the Lord don't want me shooting robins. I'm not so sure that I was right in that, but I don't shoot them. And I haven't eaten one since then. But I've done a lot of other things, probably worse than shooting a robin. But my wife kind of convinced me that if you're saved, you don't need to shoot birds. But she never convinced me I was not supposed to drive fast and do a lot of other things that I did. Anyway, that's my robin story. That's a hunting story.
Hear about some of the geese you shot.
You know, a friend and I killed some geese one Monday. His name was David Selby. We used to hunt together a little bit. Somebody to know David. He had a 57 Pontiac. And the first day, we killed a few geese and brought them home. And the next day, David said, "I'll take you tomorrow where you can kill some ducks." Okay. So we went down there where Barbara Shandy used to be. It's just a little bit beyond Lake Landing. And we started walking back toward the refuge. And we got out that little ways. I said, David, aren't we on the refuge? He said, a little bit. I said, are we going nuts, Father? He said, a little bit. And there was a pond there about a quarter of a mile long. Just as soon as we got to the pond, we killed 4 geese. I'd never seen a duck there. And we stayed there a few more minutes and we killed 4 more. We brought those 8 geese, put them in the trunk of the car, come home, mixed the rest of our geese, put them. We almost had a trunk full of geese. We started up the road to Margie's, and we give her the biggest goose, because she and Ray had 3 boys and a girl, and it was a large family. And we give everybody on the point of goose that wanted a goose until we got to Alton, the last house where Brenda lived. And the next day, on Wednesday, we give Alton one, and Charles Knight's another one, because Charles Knight said his was spoiled. I think he shot it in the stomach. They turn green when you shoot them in the stomach. But we gave everybody on the point of goose that wanted a goose. And we hunted some days we didn't kill a goose too. It's not always that good.
We're running out of time. If you had to describe Stumpy Point in one word, what would the word be?
Awesome.
It's different.
Unique. Have you still got a little more time? I was up in David's shop the other day and I saw he's got a collection of ads up there. I don't know if you know what they are, but it's an old woodwright's tool, I would call it, for making planks and cutting timbers. Well, during the war when Daddy Bob went up there to get a job, he told me that he went before the man that was going to hire him, and he said, Mr. Midgett, have you had any experience with the ads? And he said, yes, I have. Because he was trying to get the job. He said, can you describe your experience with the ads? He said, I killed a black snake with one. He got the job.
You know, it don't hurt to be positive. Yeah, I had a cousin, his name was Milton Hooper. He went to Norfolk one time to apply for the job as a welder in Norfolk Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. And the man said, can you weld? He said, yes, I can weld. He said, come show me. Milton said he took him in there to a welder and said he couldn't strike an arc. He said, I don't think I can hire you. But you know, a lot of people around here are positive. I worked with Roger one time when we were old and nobody worked with us. And you know, Roger thinks he can do everything. He
can.
Yeah, he's the most confident man I ever met. It doesn't mean he can do it. It just means he thinks he can do it. And he said to me one day, I was telling him that I thought we might want to move some crab pots into another little slough where a man was catching more crabs than we were, and he was fishing about half as many pots. And Roger said, I know what I'm doing. I don't make many mistakes. And I thought, you make one once in a while. I've known you since you were born. I have known Roger a long time. We're all kin around here. Our grandmothers were sisters. Our granddaddies were cousins. Pretty sure there must be some kin. I had a man working with me one time, and it was rough. We were crabbing, and he was mad. And he was Roger's son-in-law. And he started to say something about Roger. And I said, you know what? He supports you, pays for your car, give him his daughter, furniture the house, takes care of you. If you got anything bad to say about him, we'll just go in and we'll find him. And I'll let you tell him what you're going to tell me, and I'll see what his reaction will be. So I brought him home and fired him. Put him, get off the boat. He said, are you firing me? I said, yeah, get off the boat. And you got my shotgun in your truck, give me your shotgun. I first told him I'm going to tell you a short story. I said there was a family here one time, had a little children. And it said in the middle of the children were two sisters. And those two sisters had two children. Those two children were first cousins and best friends. They grew up together, they were the same age, got married about the same time. Those two girls had two boys. One of them was me, and one of them was Roger. We'll go find him and tell you about him.
Charles, how about Papa Monroe, my great-grandfather? Would you call him no nonsense? Kind of.
Yeah, I'd call him at least no.
Yeah, you might say that.
A little bit stiff.
The only difference between him and Sam, they were brothers. His Uncle Monroe was not crazy.
Well, I'm going to tell this story. Daddy always told me that when you borrowed a tool, he always had it greased in his barn. And if you get there to get it, he'd say, I want you to put that back like you found it.
Yeah, bring it back like you found it.
So he was pretty no nonsense. Well, do you remember Manette? I didn't know Manette. Who was Manette? Eloise's husband?
Yeah.
Sister, yeah.
Was he a card?
Yeah.
Yeah, but he weren't nothing like Uncle Monroe.
No, that's what I'm saying. He was a card. Well, I heard this story that Papa Monroe had a mule. And, you know, he did a lot of gardening, and I don't know what the mule's name was, but he liked his mule, and he expected it to be brought back properly and the way he loaned it out. Well, Manette came up the road. And Manette said, I want to borrow your mule, Monroe. And he said, okay, I'll let you borrow the mule. And Manette must have known Papa Monroe pretty well and knew how he was, so he took the mule down the road. Well, Mr. Luther lived up the road, and for some reason he was down there, and he sold the mule to Manette. Manette sold the mule to Luther. So Papa was out there in his yard gardening, and he looked up, and here comes Luther with his mule coming up the road, headed home with his new mule. And Papa Monroe said, what are you doing with that mule? He said, well, I just bought him from Manette. I guess Manette, got his money, but maybe he sold him on credit. But Mr. Luther didn't know what was up, but Manette knew what was up when he borrowed the mule.
He got more nerve than I got.
You know, I borrowed a shovel from Uncle Monroe one time. He said, now, son, I want you to bring this shovel back just like you got it. The shovel looked like it was brand new. I come up, I was married then. I come up and used that shovel, and when I got through, I took it to a garden hose. I washed that thing just as clean as you could get it, took it out to the back door to the pump house, and oiled it with a quart of Havoline oil, and carried it back and gave it to Uncle Monroe. But he wasn't that bad a guy, because he told me one time when I hadn't been married very long, he said, I don't have very much money. He said, if you ever need anything, I'll let you have it. And he had an old 10-gauge shotgun. I think it's still in your family somewhere.
Yeah.
And he told me one time, he said, if you ever want to borrow that gun, come get it. I thought he would let me head on thief, but then he had to let me have the gun. But he said, you can come get the gun. They weren't all bad. I kind of loved the man. But the other half of humanity was scared of him.
Talking about that old gun, Daddy told me that Grandma Theed would make things out of pillow ticking. And she had a clothespin bag made out of pillow ticking. and she had another bag that looked just like it. She had made him to carry his shotgun shells in. Well, they had, I think they had they caught a bear, I think is the story. And he grabbed his gun and his bag of shells and ran back there. The bear was in a trap. And when he reached in the bag, it was clothespins.
You know, Mr. Munro had a real big garden, and it was like a fresh food market kind of. A lot of people went there and bought things from him, like strawberries and, you know, and produce all the time. He had kind of like a little business where he made extra money. And Miss Steve, which was my wife's grandmother, when he got there, and a woman would come up there, you know, something to get her some strawberries or whatever, Miss Steve would watch him through a set of spyglasses and keep her eye on him.
I think I was even jealous.
Yeah.
Mama always told me this thing would go.
I got them glasses.
What the hell was I doing out there with my butt?
I thought Sonny Walker had them.
Yeah, we got them. Kept her eye on him.
The one that got them for you.
I'm glad my wife's not like that.
You really got her on the
I did.
I know it wasn't that bad. I remember buying some tomatoes from him one time. I bought 5 pounds. He had about 5 and a quarter pounds. And then he gave me another big tomato. And that's the way he weighed out things that he bought. You didn't buy things like you do at the store today, you know, 5 pounds, 1 ounce. He always give you a little more than you paid for. He was still no nonsense, but he always give you your money's worth. I remember buying honey from him, 10 cents, I guess, a piece of honey. Probably 4x4 piece of honey, 10 cents. More than a young boy could eat. I was 8 or 9 years old then, maybe 10 or 12. I bought honey from him a lot of times. He sold everything. He raised honey to have something to pollinate his cucumbers and cantaloupe, squash. Something I need. I can't get my cucumbers to grow. They just fall off. I don't have any to use. You know, talking about that mule reminded me of a mule my granddaddy had. I ever tell you about the mule?
No.
It was he used the mule to plow with in the summer, and he plowed a lot of different areas with Stumpy Point. But the rest of the time, the mule didn't have anything to do. He just lay around the house and get in the way, provoke people, and he loved corn. And right inside the barn door, my granddad had a barrel of corn that he used to feed his chickens and his pigs, to kill pigs every winter along about Christmas. He had a yard full of chickens. And in the corn, he had sweet corn and hog corn and popcorn all in one barrel. And the old mule would watch. Anytime he got a chance, my granddad left the barn door open, he stepped up there and stick his head in that barn door and eat that corn. And one day in August, my granddaddy fed his pigs and fed his chickens, and he forgot to close the door. And the old mule saw that barn door open. He slipped up there and stuck his head in that barn. It was one of the real hot days in August. That popcorn started popping. The old mule thought it was snowing, and he froze to death. That don't happen around here anymore.
You talking about shooting robins. Did you know Mr. Wellington Payne? Did anybody remember him?
Oh, yeah.
When I was 13 years old, Mr. Wellington was 66, and I fished with him. Mullet fished at night, about two or three nights a week. I love that old man.
What were his son's name? What were his kids?
Mr.
Mr. Luther,
Benny,
Benny.
Cruxton, Rupert,
Artist.
and he had a daughter named Velma. Remember Velma?
That was Horace Trucker's mom, wasn't
No, that was Callie.
Calvin, okay.
Who was Randolph? Was he his brother or his
His
son?
cousin. That was his nephew.
Well, you're talking about shooting robins a while ago. Mr. Luther, I remember we'd get there to his junkyard when I was little with Daddy, and Mr. Luther said he would give every boy a thimble full of BBs. I guess this would encourage good shooting. And he said whoever kills the most robins gets another thimble full of BBs. So he would give out each one of them a thimbleful, and whoever killed the most would come back and get one more thimbleful. That's how he measured them out.
Mr. Luther was the first man that I ever knew that had a keep sight on a rifle. And first time I ever saw him shooting it was there where Elizabeth lived, shooting robin at that pecan tree. And it looked like he could get one just about every crack. He could do better than I could with my rifle, and I was pretty good. You know, I was a teenager, I had real good eyesight. My rifle was pretty accurate. It wasn't expensive. I still got it. It was a 511A model Remington clip repeater.
You wouldn't have got the thimbleful, would you?
No. No, but I got a lot of I had regular customers. Ralph O'Neill buy a dozen. Miss Cecil buy a dozen. Aunt Fanny buy half a dozen. I sold her cheaper because she was my great uncle's wife. And she was a widow. I didn't give them to her.
We better end on that note, hadn't we?
Yeah, I think